like to thank everybody for coming out. Everybody should have one of these books. We're not going to refer to it that much. If you don't have one, you can grab one on the way out, or one of our team will bring you one if you'd like. But this does have a lot of details on some of the things we're going to be speaking about today. I'd like to thank you for sharing some of your valuable time with us and really investing in your future. Today is a town hall style meeting, so we want to answer your questions. If you do have a question, you can stop myself, or Gail, or Nick. Just put up your hand. The one thing is we are going to run around with a microphone, because otherwise nobody's going to hear your question. So if you do want to ask something, we're going to wave, and Tracy will run back and forth. Just hang on until she gets there with the microphone. Between the three of us, we got about 50 years of experience doing this. So we're going to start off by answering some of the questions we get fairly commonly. Again, we do want to hear from you. So just stop us as we go along, and then we'll be available afterwards. And of course, you can always contact the office. Joining me, as I said, is Gail to my immediate right, and then Nick. Also from the office, we have Mike, Mark, Raj, Nancy, Roseanne, Becky, DeJane, Sarah, Tracy, and Lindsay. All of our team is in the back of the book, so hopefully you take a few minutes to check it out. I think that's one of the advantages we can bring to people, is it's not just one person you're dealing with. It really is a team of people committed to the same thing. So you have access to a lot of different ideas and a lot of different people. Our firm was founded in 1990 with a very simple mission. The idea was to make people's lives better. You, our community, and our team. And ultimately, quite frankly, we're not an investment firm or a financial planning firm. There are certainly brokerage firms out there that sell investments. There are firms that sell financial planning. Really what we do is help people achieve their vision. So we're a vision planning firm, if you will, which is a little bit different. Retirement planning is one of those things that people don't take a lot of time to think about. And a lot of times they don't know what they want to do in retirement. According to a lot of surveys, I just saw one today in Business Insider magazine, most people spend more time planning their next vacation than their retirement. And that kind of makes sense, because if you're thinking in terms of things that are fun and soon versus things that are far away and are necessary, you're going to focus on the fun things generally. So I do congratulate you on coming out and taking some time to think about this, because everybody's going to retire at some point, whether they like it or not. Hopefully you can retire at some point. As I said, our commitment is to improving people's lives. We have a number of programs that we've pursued, and in 2013 we started something called Carver Cares, where at events such as this we partner with local nonprofits. The idea is to raise awareness of what they do. In Lake County, we have over 200 nonprofits that really benefit all of us. And today's partner is the Hope Chest. Now, they've been around for 50 years, which is kind of amazing. They are celebrating their 50th anniversary. There is some information on what they do on the tables. It's also a brief sheet from us. Their stated mission is to provide clean clothing, new shoes, socks, and underwear to school children in Lake County so they may attend school with dignity and pride. Now, they do serve kids from neighboring counties, and actually they also work with some adults. So with us tonight is Jan Milizato, Judy Szabo, and Terry Haw. So if you have questions, they'll be around as well. The details on the program are on your tables. Anything that's donated in the next 30 days, up to $4,000 will match. So hopefully everyone will participate. Thank you for joining us. So, a lot of people are going to be retired longer than they worked. It used to be people worked till 65 or 66, and then they kind of keeled over by about 70. So retirement wasn't a really long proposition. At this point, people want to work till they're 55 or 56, and then they live forever. So in some cases, people really will be retired longer than they worked. And so planning's becoming, I think, more important than ever. Now, certainly the investments, technology, tax laws, all that stuff continues to change. And the pace of change keeps getting faster. As someone said to me, never has the pace of change been this fast, and never will be this slow again, because things continue to increase. But with all that change, what we've seen is people invest and plan for the same reasons. And typically it's to fund education for kids, it's to have a comfortable retirement, or it's to pay for something in the near term, like a house or a vacation. As I say, the investments, the tax laws, all that stuff changes, but the reasons people are doing it is not. So when we founded the firm in 1990, our primary role was getting information to people. So it's hard to figure out what people needed to do. Now, we're inundated with information. I mean, there's a 24-hour news cycle, there's all kinds of things on the web, and really our role is more to filter out what's relevant to you, to figure out what's important, and then try to come up with a plan based on what you need to do. And as a company, we've developed and refined a fairly unique process that bases this on your vision as opposed to the investments. And ultimately, this is a dynamic process. So one of the things people ask about is, okay, I've got my retirement plan done, now what? Well, it's not a now what, it's a continuing process as things change with you and with laws and the economy and so forth. So we do believe it's important to have an ongoing conversation with your advisor, and then events such as this can start to supplement meetings. The last thing I'll say is, when things are going well, the value of an experienced team and what they can do for you may not be as apparent as when things are going fairly rough. The last couple years, and particularly year to date, have been phenomenally good for the broader markets. Maybe today notwithstanding, but things are moving up. And so, as Warren Buffett said, it's only when the tide goes out you can see who's swimming naked. As far as stuff going up, the planning may not seem that important. And there's both an art and a science to this. The science is kind of picking what you need to do and doing the analysis. The art is developing a plan and a balance that meets your risk tolerance. It meets your needs today, and it meets your needs in the future. And that's where having that conversation with your advisor starts to come into play. So, one of the first questions we seem to be getting is, what do you think is going to happen with the markets, the economy, and all that stuff? And frankly, nobody knows. We don't have a crystal ball, and the planning that we do is not based on predicting what's going to happen the next week or month or next year, but it's based upon what you're trying to do and developing enough cash and enough income to do that. We do think one of the things that's going to continue to happen is that inflation is going to continue to pick up. Now, there's a couple ways you can look at inflation. The government talks about something called CPI, Consumer Price Index. But if you look at what makes that up, 44% of it's real estate. There's very little in gasoline. About 14% is groceries. I don't know about you, but I buy more groceries than I buy real estate. On top of which, the government uses that to figure out Social Security increases. So they want to keep it as low as possible. And the way that's been calculated has changed over the years. What I would suggest to you is that real inflation is a lot higher than zero that the government claims. Does anybody think it costs the same to buy groceries today as it did 10 years ago? Does it cost a bunch more? Yeah, that's inflation. I mean, there's very little that costs less today than it did 10 years ago, and pretty much everything costs more, including gasoline, which is very, very cheap. So we think inflation is going to go up, and that's a very, very important thing when you're doing your planning. The other things, we do think interest rates are going to move up, which will negatively impact bonds. So sometimes things that people think are safe because they have a fixed interest rate may be exposed to other types of risk. And so planning based on what's happened is never a good idea. It's like driving down the road, looking in the rearview mirror. It works really well as long as the road doesn't change. And then when you get a curve, things change. So we think it's important to plan, understanding that things are going to cost more in the future, understanding interest rates are probably going to go up, and understanding that people are going to probably live a lot longer than they may have. In the near term, we do expect a lot more volatility, and today's a good example. The media gets on these binges of things. I think between the Russians, and today it's impeaching Trump. Next week it'll probably be sunspots or something. But that's going to move the markets around and ultimately will affect portfolios. The key though is if you have enough cash flow, is it doesn't really matter. If you appraised your house every week, and actually you can go on Zillow and look at your house pretty much every week, the value of your house goes up and down like crazy. But it doesn't matter because you're living it and you're not selling it. We'd suggest with a properly diversified portfolio that the same thing is kind of true. So, any questions on any of that? We're going to jump into some of the other questions. Okay. The next big one is, can I afford to retire? And the answer is it depends, what you want to do when you retire. The key question is, what do you want retirement to look like? And people spend a lot of time thinking about numbers and money, but they don't necessarily think about exactly what they want to do. So before somebody retires, we suggest you sit down and you really think, what is that day, what is that month going to look like? What are you going to do all day? Because if you can't answer that, certainly you can't plan from a financial standpoint, but also it may not make sense to retire until you have a better answer. It's kind of like saying, when people think about retirement, everybody says, I want to retire. It's kind of like saying, I want to go to Europe. Okay? That's fine, but that's just saying I want to go to Europe. When do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Certainly a trip to Germany is different than a trip to Paris. Are you going to take a boat? Are you going to take a plane? Well, we need to figure that out. And retirement's the same thing. They figure out what you want it to look like, when do you want to retire, and how long is the retirement going to last. The other thing, when looking at this, I think we need to be very reasonable in our return and withdrawal expectations. In your book, there's a really good table that talks about withdrawal rates. As a rule of thumb, a reasonable sustainable withdrawal rate is 2 to 4% a year of your assets. Now, it's a little bit counterintuitive because over time, people say, well, the market's made 8 or 9 or 10%. The fact is, if you look at the table, even though the market's made that, if you took 5 or 6% a year, 50, 60% of the time you've run out of money in less than 25 years. So, again, when we look at how long does the money need to last, we need to think about that, not in terms of our parents, but in terms of ourselves. And what's a reasonable return expectation? And then what's a reasonable withdrawal expectation? And here we got some tables. And that's important to talk about with your advisor, as far as the specifics on that. And that comes back to the other question, how much money do I need to retire? Well, it depends. How much income do you need to generate? And what other sources of income, which Gail's going to talk about in a little bit. What other sources of income do you have? Do you have Social Security or don't you? Maybe you don't have Social Security because you paid into SDRS or railroad retirement. We do have a planning tool available that can look at some of these things. It's called GPM, and your advisor can tell you about it. But again, unless you have an idea of some of the things that you want to do and how much you're going to need, that the output's not gonna be that relevant. But I think it's a very useful tool once you start to have some of those ideas. And we can show you what it's gonna look like out for 20 or 30 years. Now, the next question we got is, should I take a pension or should I take a lump sum? Pensions are disappearing, certainly. But a lot of people that are in Lake County still have the option to take a pension or lump sum. Or in the case of teachers and police, it's what I call a plop payment. You can take essentially a lump sum for part of your pension amount. The question is not just a financial one. And it's also a function of when we're talking about this. 10 or 15 years ago, when interest rates were higher, lump sums were very small. And in a lot of cases, the pension just made more sense financially. Today, generally speaking, the pension does not make as much sense from a financial standpoint as the lump sum. You can generate as much income from the lump sum as you can from the pension, and you have access to the money. If you take a pension, one, you're stuck with that payment and that's it. You can't access additional funds. Two, if you don't need the money, you're paying taxes on income you don't need. And three, the pension could be cut if something happens to people paying. Now, there are some guarantees through PBGC, but there are also, things happen when you're talking 20 or 30 years. On the other hand, and the other thing is with a pension, depending on what you take, usually you can take some sort of continuation for a spouse, but generally it's not going to continue beyond the life of the spouse. So if one of your goals is to leave money to kids, with a lump sum, hopefully you haven't spent it, and certainly if something happens to you sooner than expected, the money's there. So the lump sum gives you a lot of flexibility. That the potential issue is you could blow through it. So if you don't trust yourself, certainly you could spend it, and if you're a spendthrift, that could be an issue. The other issue that's going to come up, and I'm going to touch on this later, is rolling over lump sums and 401ks is going to become more difficult from an administrative standpoint because of this new Department of Labor rule. This was supposed to go into effect April 10th, and we've talked to some of you about it. At this point, it looks like it's going to be June 10th. The Trump administration pushed it back. They may do that again, we'll know in a few days. But at this point, they seem to have a lot on their minds, so who knows. But once that goes into effect, if it goes into effect, it will be a little bit more difficult to do a rollover or a transfer, which we can get into. Like I say, the other thing about the lump sum is you don't have to take the income. So you can invest if you don't need the income, it can grow tax deferred for you.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, I got a question. I don't know where Tracy is. She's coming. Up front table over here.
When it comes to the lump sum versus the pension, when you make your first decision, are you locked into that decision, or can you change it?
So when you say make your first decision as far as how to invest it,
How to invest it?
no, you can, once it's rolled over to an IRA, you can do whatever you want. You can take money, not take money.
But when you're at a company, or you're retiring, and you've got this pension that you need to use,
No, it's a one-time decision.
so it's a one-time decision?
You either take the pension or the lump sum, and once you decide, it's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Right. But once you put it in the IRA, and you do, that's the other question. If you roll it over, there is no tax. So some people worry, oh, I'm going to pay a bunch of tax. If you roll the pension lump sum, or your 401k for that matter, to an IRA, there is no tax. And you don't have to invest it right away. You let it sit in cash and decide. But once you elect a pension, that is irrevocable. Yep. Any other questions on that? Okay, a couple more for we get Gail. The next question is, well, how do I get income? I want to start taking income. And from that standpoint, once money is in an IRA. You can take it monthly, quarterly, annually, on demand. One of the important things though to understand is, are there any penalties to do so? Now, everything that we work with is totally liquid. There's no fees up front, there's no penalty to get out. So you take whatever you want, whenever you want. Out of an IRA, you will pay taxes, potentially. And that's a different thing, but I'm talking about a penalty. But if you put money into an annuity, for example, they may charge a penalty if you take money out. Or a bank CD or certain types of investments could tie you up. Notwithstanding that, once it is invested into the IRA, you can start taking income or you can take on-demand withdrawals. It's as simple as calling saying, hey, I need $5,000 in my bank. We can take taxes out if you want us to. So some people set up basically a monthly check, kind of like a paycheck. We take the taxes out. You don't have to do estimated payments. And then if they need extra, they'll go in and take the extra. You don't want to take more than you need though, because then you're just paying tax, or potentially paying tax on money that you may not necessarily need. Now the other thing is where you take money from can make a big difference, and Cale's going to touch base on that, because you can do some planning around the source of the funds. You know, in 1 year it may make sense to take it from an IRA, because you're in a very low tax bracket, and the next year may not, because you're in a higher tax bracket. And that's why I say it's kind of an ongoing dynamic process. And that's one of the mistakes we see people make. Is they set something up, turn it on, and they just let it run, and it's never really updated. So you do need to coordinate the withdrawals. You know, we'd work with your CPA, your attorney, etc., to try to coordinate that. Because at the end of the day, and I know you've heard me say this about 1,000,000 times, it's not how much you make that's important, it's how much you keep, net of taxes, fees, and expenses. So you could have one person say, oh, I'm making 8%. But if they're paying half of that to taxes, they're not really making 8%. They're getting 4%. So we want to look at the things we can control, and taxes is one of those. And a lot depends on where and the order you take things out of. Now, generally speaking, if you take money out of an IRA prior to 59.5, you'll pay not only tax, but you'll pay a 10% IRS penalty. So the question is, can I avoid that penalty somehow? And the answer is yes. There are some ways to do it. So there's exceptions. It depends on your circumstances. You may qualify for one of these. So first of all, if you're disabled, generally the penalty is waived. The second one is if the IRA owner were to die and a beneficiary has the money, they can take the money out. They pay taxes, but there is no 10% penalty for the beneficiary. The one that used to be used a lot and it's still available is something called Rule 72T. And any of these rules like 401ks or 72T, it just refers to the IRS code section. But 72T says you could start taking substantially equal payments from an IRA prior to 59.5 without a penalty, as long as it's based on your life expectancy. The only rule is once you start, you have to continue for at least 5 years. So if you were 58 years old and you started, you'd have to continue the same payment until you're 63. If you change it, you'll be charged back penalties from the IRS, plus interest, plus. Now, with that, you don't have to turn on all of your IRAs. So if someone's younger, we might set up one IRA, generate income, turn on the 72T, and then there are other ones that are still out there. There are also some other exceptions for qualifying medical expenses, education, those types of things. But generally they're limited to about $10,000. But there are ways to draw prior to 59.5. The problem, of course, is if you're retiring prior to 59.5, you don't want to run out of money because that retirement may be 30 years. So we do need to look at that. Last 3 questions. What about annuities? We get asked that a lot. Annuities are both an investment and a way of taking money. and the terms seem to be used interchangeably. So an annuity means a stream of payments you receive for a lifetime or for a set period. A pension is essentially an annuity. It's a fixed payment you'll get for so long. There's also an annuity as an investment, which is an insurance contract. And you put the money in, and it grows, and at some point you can take the money out. There are good annuities and there are bad annuities. The ones you keep hearing about, especially locally, are these equity indexed annuities. You know, when the market goes up, you'll go up. When the market goes down, you make a reasonable rate of return, but you never lose money. Well, sort of. First of all, they tie you up for 10 years, typically. And if you take out more than what they allow you, you pay the penalty that can be as much as 10%. On top of the tax penalty, on top of the IRS penalty. That's just their penalty. Second of all, some annuities are very expensive internally. And so it's pretty hard to grow when they're charging you 2 to 3 to 4% a year. And so there can be a place for annuities, but you need to really understand what you're getting into and what the penalties are. And certainly we do not like these equity indexed annuities. I mean, they're kind of all the rage, especially as the markets get more volatile. We need to be very careful about that. And one of the things about them is because they're not considered securities, there's no prospectus, and the people selling them don't need to be securities licensed. They need to take a 1-week course, and then they can sell them. Last two questions, and we get a lot. How do you guys charge for what you do? Generally, we charge a fee based on the assets. We do have some accounts that have been around that are commission-based, but most accounts we do today are based on a flat fee. There's a couple of reasons we do that. First of all, we think it's more transparent, you know what you're paying. Second of all, it tends to be less expensive overall. And third of all, it puts us on the same side of the table. You make more money, we make more money. If you go down, you're probably going to leave because you're not tied up. You know, there's no penalty with it. We do not sell any proprietary investments. We don't sell anything that ties you up. You know, we're agnostic as far as what we work with, whether it's Vanguard or Schwab or et cetera. So you can get in or out of things at any time. The last thing is this Department of Labor rule that some people have heard about, the fiduciary rule. And I think you're going to hear more about it if the news cycle wasn't being sucked up by the Russians and James Comey and everything else. But essentially this rule says that, and by the way, the intention of the rule is very good. This was something President Obama pushed through. About a year ago it passed Congress. In April of 2016, it was supposed to go into effect April of this year. And it was supposed to do a couple things. One, increase the transparency of expenses so people know what they're paying. I think it's a good thing. Second thing is, it says that you have to act in the best interest of the client. You have to become a fiduciary. Right now, there are two standards. Registered investment advisors, which is what we are, have to act in the best interest of the client. Brokerage firms have to do what's suitable. They don't have to do what's in your best interest. A lot of firms are either putting much bigger minimums on their investments, or they're basically firing clients in anticipation of this. We've been a fiduciary since 1990, so it doesn't really affect us. But one of the things it says is commissions are a conflict of interest, which they are. You get paid if you sell something. A flat fee, there isn't a conflict of interest. And so, from a fiduciary standpoint, we think it's a better way to work with people. That's how we work. We don't charge, you know, if we're spending time with somebody to talk to your CPA, your attorney, we're not charging for our time for that. We don't do retainers or any of that. It's the one fee based on the account, which again, your advisor's happy to discuss with you. Any questions on all that? Yes?
Thank you for taking my question. With the Roth IRA backdoor rollover, is there a current time window or horizon that is in sight, particularly relative to retiring early, where your financial W-2 statement will be drastically reduced, so therefore within the next year or two, doing that rollover will be much less of a tax burden upon the account?
Oh, that's a good question. So to define backdoor Roth for everybody, right now to contribute to a Roth IRA, if your income's over a certain threshold, you can't put it into the Roth. But no matter what your income is, you can make a non-deductible contribution to your IRA and then immediately convert it to the Roth. So it's a backdoor Roth. Now, one thing we should point out, though, that people miss is if you already have an existing IRA and you make a non-deductible contribution to that and then you convert to the Roth, even though that non-deductible contribution is not taxable, they prorate the whole thing. So let me give you an example because that's a lot of numbers or information. You have a $100,000 IRA. You put $6,000 in it as a non-deductible contribution. And you go to convert $6,000 to a Roth. Of that $6,000, because on $106,000, $6,000 is roughly 5%. On the $6,000, $5,700 will be taxable on the conversion, and $300 will not. So that's kind of the first part. To your question about the limit, it's a very good question. Because prior to a couple years ago, you could only convert to a Roth IRA if your income was under $100,000. Now there's no income cap. In the tax proposals, there's no specific language I've seen to limit the ability to convert to Roths. But I think that will happen, because both of them talk about these so-called tax loophole closers. So what I would say is, one, if you're going to do it, this is probably a good year to do it. Two, if it's a true backdoor Roth, there's no tax, so it doesn't really matter. If you're converting IRA to Roth, that's a little tougher. I mean, to your point, is there a limit? I mean, they're going to allow you to convert this year, and that may go away. I think it probably will go away because it's the way it used to be. As far as, if you wait till next year, because your income's lower, so you pay less tax. What I would say is convert it this year, because you have until October 15th of next year to reverse it. One of the things with Roths is if you convert to a Roth, they give you to the following October 15th to reverse the decision. So what I'd say is do it this year. If taxes go down, reverse it and do it again. If on the other end they eliminate the ability to do it, then you're in. If that makes a lot of sense. It's going to be a very interesting year because the tax proposals, if anybody wants, I know we sent to some of you, kind of the two plans, the Trump plan and the other plan. Hopefully by August we'll have some clarity on that. I would not do any major changes in anticipation of it. I'd wait to see what happens. But it's going to be interesting. And we think there's going to be some good planning opportunities. Okay, any other questions for me before we turn over to Gail? Go ahead, Gail.
This thing on. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So, Randy had mentioned retirement income, and that's really a couple of things that I want to talk about. The first of which is going to apply to a lot of people in this room is Social Security. That's a big one. And the big question we get is that simple question of, well, when should I turn on my benefit? When should I start to collect Social Security? And when people ask me that, I usually will make a joke and say, well, that's easy. If you can tell me the day you're going to die, I'll tell you exactly when to turn it on. And as I started to think about that, though, that's not even accurate, because even if somehow we knew what date that would be, we still would want to ask you some other questions and really think about it, because one of the issues with a lot of those break-even analysis and those online retirement calculators is they don't take into consideration the timing of when you receive those distributions, those income payments, and most importantly, what that allows you to do. So they focus solely on the dollars. It's a very black and white calculation, and the outcome on that typical break-even analysis, it's going to look at how do I get the most dollars out of Social Security. And as we talk with clients, most of the time they're much more excited about receiving income maybe in their 60s when they're active, healthy, traveling, versus delaying so that they can maybe get a few extra bucks in their pocket in their 80s. So I think you really need to look beyond the numbers a little bit and focus more so not just on the dollars, but more importantly on what those dollars allow you to do. And that's a lot of where the discussion goes. But generally speaking, there's going to be 3 different ages that you want to keep in mind when it comes to Social Security, first of which is age 62. So that's going to be the earliest that you're able to turn on your benefit. And the thing to keep in mind if you do decide to turn it on at 62 or earlier is you have to be careful if you're still working or if you're working in a part-time capacity. There's an earnings limit, so you can only make about $17,000 of earned income if you're collecting early before your benefit starts to be reduced. So generally speaking, if you are still working, it's likely not going to make sense to turn on Social Security prior to your full retirement age, and that's that second age you want to think about. So for most people in the room, full retirement age is going to be somewhere between age 66 and 67. And what happens there is that earnings cap is removed. So now, if you're 66 or 67, you can work as much as you want and collect your unreduced benefit. So that's another one of those trigger dates that you can start to think, do I want to turn on my benefit? And then that final age that you want to have on your radar is age 70. Because at age 70, that's when, if you've delayed all the way up to that point, each and every year your benefit has gone up by 8% per year. That's great, but at age 70, it stops going up any further. So if you haven't turned it on by 70, I hope nobody in this room is eligible and they're over 70 because you're leaving money on the table. So you need to turn it on if you are age 70. So there's this window of time between age 62 and 70 that we can help you kind of navigate and figure out when is the best time and most opportune time for you to turn on that benefit. So a couple of things. I mentioned that if you don't turn it on each year, it's going to go up by 8%. And to a lot of people, that sounds pretty good. So why would you maybe want to turn it on earlier? Why would you want to turn on and collect those benefit dollars earlier? And the first reason that I would say, and it might seem kind of obvious, but it's can you afford not to turn it on? And for a lot of you in this room, Social Security is going to be a big portion of that retirement income plan. And if you really need the income and you're retired, it typically is not going to make sense to delay if it comes at the expense of significantly depleting your retirement accounts. So one of the questions is, and we can help you work through this, do you even have a choice? Can you afford not to turn it on? Another one is something called means testing. So has anyone ever heard of that, or anybody aware? I see some heads nodding. Anybody think that might be coming down the line for Social Security benefits? And that's something that, and just to give you an idea as to what means testing is, Nick's going to talk a little bit about it as it relates to your Medicare premiums, which you might be seeing now, but it's essentially going to potentially tie your Social Security benefits to things like your income or maybe even your assets. And I'll tell you right now what the narrative is going to be is they're going to say, well, we've got a Social Security problem and we need to fix it. Well, one of the easy solutions is to, we'll just reduce Warren Buffett and all of his friends. They don't need their benefits, so maybe we'll reduce it by 10, 15, 20%, and everyone's gonna say, oh, yeah, that sounds great. It comes out of somebody else's pocket, so sign up for that. And then once you see the details, you find out that you're one of Warren Buffett's friends, and you're in that same boat. So that could be coming down the pipe. That realistically, we need to make some changes, and I think means testing is something that maybe should be on your radar. So if you think that's a distinct possibility, you're concerned about it, one of the advantages of starting receiving these checks a little bit earlier is once you have that money in your pocket, they can't come back after it. So something to think about when it comes to means testing. So, Social Security, there's a lot of nuances that go into Social Security. It's a really personalized decision. You really need to sit down with your advisor to see how it fits into your plan. We'll sit down, we'll walk through all your different options, whether it's spousal benefits, should you collect on your record or your spouse's. Randy mentioned things like SERS, STRS, PERS. If you're eligible for one of those programs, I'm sure you're well aware of the offsets that go along with that. Again, we'll help you sort through that. There's a Cavs game tonight, so I'm not going to go into that. But bottom line is, it's a really important decision. We'll help you work through that. You really should sit down with your advisor. But those are some of the real high-level things that you want to be thinking of. And I know I kept it really high level, which you have to because it is so personalized. But any general questions as it relates to Social Security? Bill, why don't you shout it out?
Would it make sense to delay taking Social Security until you're 70, in the meantime draw more from your 401k or your IRA?
Potentially. I mean, okay, so the question, to repeat the question, is would it make sense to delay Social Security to maybe 70, and then in the meantime to make up that income gap, withdraw off your 401k? And the answer to all these are probably going to be it depends. I mean, it depends on the size of your 401k, so, possibly. But, that also doesn't take into consideration, if means testing comes on down the line. I mean, the thing I would hate to see happen is, let's say you're 66 right now and you're eligible for $2,000 a month. Sure, if you delay till 70, it's going to go up 8% per year. I can't do the math as quick as Randy in my head, so maybe that's $2,500 a month if you wait till age 70. I just would hate to see a situation where you forego 4 years of checks and then 4 years down the line, because of means testing, you're back at $2,000 a month. That's the concern.
So can that means testing, are they allowed to take the money, like if you did take it earlier and then means testing goes into effect, can they take what they already started giving you because means testing went into effect?
So the question is, if they start means testing, would they be able to come back and, I guess you could call it a clawback, come back and get some of those earlier benefits? I mean, I want to be clear that means testing isn't happening right now. There's no specifics that it's going to be happening, and I think the answer to that's no. I mean, I hope the answer to that's no.
They can't say, well, we have to adjust.
Sure. Well, it would be going forward. It would be saying that, and I'm sure they would give you some leeway and say that these changes would be phased in. It's most likely not going to impact people that are currently collecting. I mean, for myself and for Nick, and Randy's probably going to be fine too. But for myself and Nick, our rules are going to change.
Yeah, the question's kind of about early retirement, estimating your Social Security payment. Because we did those estimates about 5 years, every 5 years now, and we always have the clause that says, oh, by such and such a year, more money's gonna be going out of the system than in, and this fund's gonna run out, and oh, these glaciers are gonna melt, and so we're predicting you're only gonna be receiving like 75 cents on the dollar maybe. So how does one have a clue what they're gonna get for an estimated Social Security payment? And how do you estimate something like that?
Sure. So your Social Security statement that you get, and now you receive them, you should receive them every 5 years in the mail. And you can always go online to ssa.gov to pull that up. And the calculation is actually based on your earnings record, and they take your top 35 years of work. There's a formula, and the average of those top 35 years of work to come up with your benefit amount. So it is very personalized on those statements. I mean, it is actually what your benefit is. I think the bigger question is, what does Social Security look like, and how solvent is the program? I mean, I think that's the elephant in the room. But so in terms of the numbers, you need to understand that Social Security is what they call a pay-as-you-go system. So the dollars that come out of my paycheck go to pay somebody's benefits. It's not as if that money, it's not like a traditional pension plan where those dollars are being saved and being invested. And right now, there's more money that's coming in than's going out. So, but we look at the projections and the baby boomers that are retiring. I think it's 10,000 every day. Those numbers are going to change, and based on the current figures, it's around 2019 where the numbers change a bit, and we're getting to that break-even point where now then we're tapping into the Social Security reserves, and there is a Social Security trust fund that has reserves that we can continue to pay out the same benefits. And anytime you're projecting numbers over multi-decades, who knows how accurate it's going to be, but the last thing I read, it's through 2034 we should be able to keep those same benefits. at the end of the day, we're going to need to make some adjustments. We don't know what adjustments those are going to be at this point. But I would say that for everybody that's in this room, I mean, you're coming in here to learn about transitioning to retirement, which means you're probably 50 plus, getting close. I would be pretty comfortable using those projections that you have right now, and if there's any sort of reduction, I think it's going to be slight for you. I'm not, for my own personal retirement planning, it's a little bit of a different story. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Do you
Okay.
think the means testing might be a bigger impact than the elephant?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I mean, the money's got to come from somewhere. So, for instance, right now, I mean, and these are all hypothetical, potential solutions that have been floated around. And I mean, the problem is, it's politically, nobody wants to cut those benefits. I mean, so it's nothing you're going to really hear about. But one of the other things that could make a big change is by removing the cap on earnings that you're being taxed on. So current workers, right now I think it's maybe $130,000 or so. You pay into Social Security just on that portion of it, and then above and beyond that, there is no Social Security that comes out of your check. They may adjust that, and that would help as well. Any other questions? Okay, so we were back to that retirement income. The other big thing we want to look at are the taxes. Randy had mentioned the idea of it's not what you make, but what you keep, and that goes hand in hand with receiving retirement income. So just because you're not working, that doesn't mean that you aren't still paying taxes. Talk to any retiree. Trust me, they're still paying tax. So Randy talked a lot about the mechanics of how you actually receive that income, and most people have it set up where it's that monthly retirement paycheck. It's a direct deposit into your bank account, and that's really the easy part. Getting you the money, that's the easy part. Where we come into play and where we can really help is to figure out which accounts, based on your personal situation, which accounts are the best ones to utilize. And the whole goal is to minimize tax. It doesn't do anybody any good to pay taxes unnecessarily. But you'll notice I said minimize, not avoid when it comes to taxes. Because one thing I think we need to just come to grips with and understand is when it comes to your IRAs, 401ks, your qualified retirement plans, the government's going to get their tax dollars on those. One way or another. They're going to get it from you, or they're going to get it from your kids. Someone's going to pay tax on those accounts. So once you just accept that fact, then you can direct all your effort and energy to getting money out at the lowest rate possible and minimizing that tax implication. So here's a couple of basic strategies that we use that help, and we've had a lot of success with. The first one is be aware of the 15% bracket. I think a lot of people don't quite understand that if you're a married couple filing jointly, you can make up to about $77,000 a year, and that's taxable income after all your deductions, and still be in that 15% bracket. So you might find yourself in that situation if you're in retirement. Well, take advantage of that, and maybe it makes sense to consider taking small distributions out of the IRA, and the advantage there is twofold. First, you get it out at 15%, and as long as you're of the opinion that you don't think you're ever going to get a much better deal than that, I would agree with that. That's going to be a good move. And then the other thing that it does for more longer term down the line planning is it'll reduce the value of those 401ks, the IRAs, which will help when you turn age 70 and a half to reduce those required mandatory distributions, so you don't find yourself in a situation with a large 401k, a large mandatory distribution at age 70 that you have to take that potentially would throw you into a higher bracket in the future. So that's something to think about, and we can help you with that. The other way to look at it too is I'd encourage you to take a multi-generational approach when it comes to your tax planning. I mentioned that if you don't pay the tax, your kids are going to pay it. So if you're let's assume your children are your beneficiaries on these retirement plans. It's great that they're going to inherit this money, but they also inherit the tax liability that goes along with that. So maybe think about what tax bracket are your kids in? Are they working? Hopefully they're doing well. They're well off. if they're in a higher bracket than you, you're doing everybody a favor. So if you take that money out, maybe you're paying at 15%, it's a win-win. You get it out, you pay at 15%, and you're going to save your kids money in the future as well. So that's another thing to think about. And the last thing I want to talk about before I pass it over to Nick, who's going to talk a little bit about some healthcare related topics, is the emotional adjustment that comes along with retirement. Randy touched on it a little bit, but I want to expound a little because it's really, really important. We've talked a lot about numbers, and we're talking about Social Security, a lot of these what-if scenarios, and we can help you crunch those numbers. We can lay it out and show you that you can do this. You're going to be okay from a numbers standpoint. But what we can't do, I can't tell you how to fill your day. I can't tell you, what are you going to do now that you're retired. I can tell you you don't have to work, but then what? What are you going to do? And people continually underestimate this. I mean, you'd be shocked that they don't even think about it. And I'd also, so I really encourage you to start thinking about some of those interests, those hobbies. What are some of those things that you might want to do? And you really should talk about this with your spouse as well, because I've sat in many meetings where I'm sitting across from a couple, and you start talking about retirement and asking, what do you think about retirement? What do you guys want to do? And we start having the conversation, and then all of a sudden it becomes very apparent that this is the first time this topic's come up in the household, and the husband says, well, I don't want to do that, and then it's not a good conversation. So you should have that discussion, and we laugh, but it's true. You should really think about it, because it's a big change. A lot of times part-time work comes into play, maybe a volunteer position, so those are some things to think about. And when it comes to part-time work, we have a lot of retirees that are working, and it's for one reason. It's because they want to work, and it's not that prototypical Walmart greeter. It's a lot of times it's in a consulting basis in that same industry that they work their entire career, maybe even with the same company. But those are things that you should really be thinking about. And then just to kind of finalize that, and it might sound a little bit contradictory because I just told you how important that is, but also understand that it's natural not to have it all figured out, heading into it. You've never done it before, so a little bit of figuring out along the way is normal. And that's where having flexibility and having a plan that you're not tied up, you don't have penalties to move around as things change, that's really important as well. So a couple of things just to think about there, but I'm going to pass it over to Nick. He's going to talk about healthcare, some Medicare related topics, but here you go.
Thank you. Good evening. We were putting the topics together for tonight's presentation, and we were drawing the topics out of a hat, and I drew healthcare, which is everybody's favorite topic, at 8 o'clock at night before a Cavs game. So I will do my best to make sure that you walk out of here with a little bit of information. The thing you can sense a theme of here is working with an advisor, obviously, it can be very beneficial to certain people if you decide you want help, right? Because all these topics are highly complex, and they only seem to be getting more complex, healthcare not excluding. So when I was researching and putting together a presentation, I came across Donald Rumsfeld's quote about the Iraq War, and he said, there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and I think we can apply that to healthcare today, right? Healthcare, for most of us, know that we're going to need it at some point, but we don't know when. And then due to the current political environment, we don't even know if there's going to be healthcare providers in a year. So there's going to be a lot of changes. The good news is when it comes to making healthcare decisions, you can change them, right? Usually you renew what you're going to do annually, and hopefully, as the system gets better, there's going to be improvements. So we're going to have better options in the future. That's the goal. The other point I'd like to make when times are like this is if you look back in history, things act as a pendulum, right? So if one political party has been in office for a long period of time, all of a sudden they'll switch. Same goes with rising costs of healthcare. If you look at the current rate it's increasing annually, it's hard to say that it can keep up at the pace that it's been. Otherwise, everybody in this room doesn't have the future that they really envisioned, right? So I don't think we get to that point, and I think it touches on the Social Security question earlier, that they will probably make big changes right at the last moment, just like they have every time for the last 50 or 60 years, right? So when it comes to healthcare planning, I like to think of it as a decision tree. So if you have a highly complex topic or subject, you want to break it down to as simple as possible. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, am I younger than 65 or am I 65 or older, right? You're going to have healthcare coverage two different ways, depending on how old you are. So prior to 65, you're going to get coverage a couple different ways. You may have coverage through your employer. Does anybody in the room have retiree medical coverage? Okay. Has anybody previously had retiree medical coverage and no longer has it? One person. So that is a little different to what we're seeing in the past. Is there were these promises made by employers that they would provide medical coverage, and all of a sudden we wake up one day and it's not, or we're seeing premiums go up. The other thing that we're going to ask anybody that is younger than 65 and retiring is, what would the premiums be to continue coverage through your current employer through COBRAs? Have you heard of COBRA before? Right? So COBRA is kind of that period of time that allows us to figure out what we're really going to do. So it buys us typically up to 18 months. The thing to note about COBRA, you're not going to pay the premium that you paid when you were employed, because your employer was probably picking up a little bit of that cost. Usually we see up to 102% of the costs paid by the person, okay? The third option, and it's hit or miss, are the health exchanges. So I've heard success stories and I've heard some disasters. It's kind of a hit or miss option for most people. Now, in the room, how many people were an STRS or a teacher, police, fire, Ohio public employee? Okay. Right. And most other people, I assume, work for a private employer, right? So the biggest problem facing healthcare right now is there's so many different options, right? And I'm going to end the conversation here with a couple of resources. Hopefully they'll be helpful for you, and you can always call our office if you don't remember them. But prior to 65, there's a few options available to you. At 65, though, you have Medicare, right? Everybody's favorite health care provider, all right? When you're working down the decision tree, if you are 65, the next question that you're going to have to answer is, do I want to go into the original Medicare program? Most people do. Or am I going to do something called Medicare Advantage? Has anybody participated in Medicare Advantage before? Anybody? A couple people? So that's usually the census, right? Not too many people go there. And I'll split out the difference on a high level. So original Medicare is funded and paid for by the government and run by them, all right? It's a very complex program, just like any other medical program. And we certainly recommend working with a health insurance salesperson to help place a policy. But they can also walk you through the Medicare Advantage plans. To give you a high-level overview, though, the original Medicare, which most people may have in this room, is more open. It's more flexible, okay? But it doesn't cover a lot of stuff. So now you have to get these supplemental policies that help covering all the things like dental and vision and travel, both around the United States and overseas. The Medicare Advantage plans are more comprehensive, right? Or you hear them, they call them zero premium plans, right? You don't pay a premium for this policy, it's comprehensive. You still pay a premium though. You just pay the same premium as you would for Medicare. Now with those policies, they're typically less expensive because you have to go to network providers. So while you were working, every year you had to make your elections for your health insurance, and on there you might have seen something called a PPO, right? Preferred provider. Those are open. Medicare Advantage is more like an HMO, health maintenance organization, okay? So the reason the costs are lower is they get to kind of tell you where you receive health care from. And one of the downsides we see is if you do travel a lot, you may want to have some flexibility on where you get your medical care, okay? And now, there are lots of different policies out there, and I'm making, again, high-level statements. So the key is just read the fine print or work with somebody that's extremely knowledgeable in this. The other thing I wanted to make sure we touch on tonight was debunking some Medicare myths. So anybody that is registered for Medicare, did you find out that it was free, or do you pay a premium for it? Right. So there's this myth, I think, that people feel Medicare's free. I've been paying into it all my life, and it's free. And to a degree, you're right. Part A, the hospital part, is free. But the premium kicks in if you actually want to see a doctor, which is Part B. And then, by the way, if you actually want some prescriptions covered, you need to pay a premium for Part D, okay? So A, B, D are original Medicare. C is Medicare Advantage. The other one we hear is Medicare won't cover me. It actually does. It covers everybody. Now, we do see a lot of confusion between Medicare and Medicaid. And anybody sitting in this room hopefully will never be on Medicaid, because the way you become eligible for Medicaid is you don't have any money left, basically. Right? So it's a needs-based program. So our job is to make sure that everybody has enough money the rest of their lives. So most of us will stay on Medicare. The other one that we see typically is you don't have to enroll for Medicare. You have to enroll for Medicare unless you are already receiving Social Security or railroad retirement. Okay, so there's this enrollment period prior to when you're 65. It starts 3 months from the date you turn, the month you turn 65. It lasts that month and then 3 months after. So 7 months in total is when you actually get to enroll for Medicare for the first time. And if you don't, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but there could be penalties that apply, and then they have these special enrollment periods. You just went through one from October of December of last year. Okay. Now, the one thing I want to touch on, if you're not aware, Medicare doesn't cover all the costs, and I just wanted to list them real quick because most people are going to use these types of services. It's hearing and vision, dental procedures, mental health, coverage abroad. I mentioned that one before, and in that case, we usually see people get a supplemental travel policy for medical purposes. It does not cover long-term care, but it does cover 100 days of skilled nursing, and then prescriptions, right? So again, if you go the original Medicare route after making your decision, you just need to find a supplemental policy that's going to help cover those services, right? Now, if anybody stops by the office or you call, we actually have a fantastic brochure. It's from the Ohio Insurance Program, and it provides all the information on Medicare. If you want a little light reading, it's probably about 50 pages long. And it actually gives a really good overview and the costs associated with all the different supplemental policies that are available in the state of Ohio, right? So it tells you what all the letters mean. And then again, I would refer you to somebody that actually sells these policies to help you make that decision if you want it. Now, we've been talking about planning in this transition to retirement all night, and I wanted to touch on a couple things that Cale talked about as far as taking out money from your portfolio, and then I would like to say ways that you can save money, or certain accounts that you should save money into prior to retirement to help cover these costs. Does anybody have an HSA in the room, a health savings account? Right. So more hands than we saw a couple of years ago. These are going to be really popular because as the cost of medical coverage goes up, you might go into a high deductible plan, therefore you can participate in the health savings account. Now, health savings accounts are funded with pre-tax dollars, and then whenever you need the money for qualified medical expenses, it comes out tax-free. Now, those premiums, you don't have to use it or lose it like the old flexible spending accounts. Those were very, very common over the years. You get to retain all those dollars. So even if you don't use them while you're working, you still can retain that HSA, and it actually can help pay for the premiums for Medicare. Okay? The one thing it doesn't cover is the med supplemental policy premium, right? So you can't use it for that. Right? The other one that we encourage, if you can, if you have the excess cash, is you could get money into a Roth IRA. Now, we talked a little bit about a Roth IRA earlier just from conversions or the backdoor Roth and good timing. But Roth IRAs are funded with after-tax dollars, which means you already paid tax on those dollars. All the future growth is tax-free. And then when that money comes out, it doesn't get taxed. More importantly, is it doesn't get tied into your adjusted gross income, which the government uses to determine what your premium is for Medicare. So we were talking about means testing, and they could make changes to Social Security, but means testing is real. It's our reality with Medicare. Now, the majority of people never see it, because if you're married filing jointly and your adjusted gross income, modified adjusted gross income, is below $170,000 a year, that's basically all your taxable income, then you pay the premium everybody else pays. But as you go through the tiers, that premium goes up, and it goes up quite a bit, where it can cost thousands of dollars more a year. So doing some planning as you're leading up into retirement, making sure that you have accounts or money in accounts that is more tax efficient or tax free, that should certainly be part of the conversation you have with your advisor. Okay. The last thing I wanted to touch on was what resources are available. And if you've been to one of our seminars in the past, we do have various Carver Care partners, and one of them was Lake County Council on Aging. They're a phenomenal local resource, nonprofit, and they do have counselors that you can go see for free of charge, and they will sit with you and help you make some of those decisions. Again, there are also individual agents that can sit down and walk you through Medicare, help you decide with your policy, and also help you buy that policy too. The one thing to note, depending on where you go, the person that sells you that policy is paid a flat commission no matter what policy they pay or which policy you go with, right? So if you go with original Medicare and they sell you this supplemental policy, A through G, they're not paid any different if they sell you G or A. All right, and I think that's important to point out, because we want to make sure that anybody that you're going to see is making decisions in your best interests, like we would for you as well. Right? We're currently vetting another resource that would be more of a conference call, someone through Raymond James. We'll be working with them over the next couple of months to see if that'd be a good resource for people. And that was pretty much it. Is there any questions? I know I kind of was mindful of time because I can see somebody with a Cavalier shirt on over there staring at me. He's like, that's good. Yes, sir.
You mentioned HSAs, I mean,
Yeah.
can anybody open one up and throw money into it? What's the rules on that?
Yeah, so the question is, can anybody open up an HSA, health savings account? And the answer is no, right? So the first way to open up an HSA is you have to have health insurance that is health or high deductible plan, okay? And it has to be HSA compliant. So the deductible that you need to have on your policy is like $1,250 per person. Okay, so if your annual deductible per person is $2,000, your health insurance is probably eligible for an HSA. Okay.
How much money can you put in?
So this year, there's a base amount for a family of $6,750. If you're over the age of 55, each person over age 55 can put in another $1,000 apiece, so a total of $8,750 now. The HSAs are gaining popularity, and if you're renewing your health insurance options, I'd take a look at these, because it's the only way, I like to say, is a loophole for the common man. Businesses have tons of loopholes, but the money comes out of your paycheck, goes directly into the HSA, not taxed. If it comes out of the HSA and it's used for qualified medical expenses, it's tax-free. In my mind, that's a loophole, right? The 401k contribution is no tax up front, tax when you take it out, not a loophole. Okay.
The HSA, you have to be working, you can't put money in if you're retired.
Yeah, so another good point, Jim. So you have to be working, right, to have an HSA. You also can't contribute to them if you're enrolled for Medicare. I wasn't going to talk about that too much tonight, but if you are still working and you're turning 65 and plan on working a few more years and participating in an HSA, I would strongly encourage you to talk to your HR department, because if they don't require you to enroll in Medicare, right? So you'll still have your company plan. you still kind of have to enroll for Medicare Part A sometimes at 65. If you enroll in Medicare, you can't put contributions into your HSA anymore. Okay?
And when you say qualified expense,
Yeah.
my wife opens an HSA,
hmm
can we use those dollars to pay for mine?
Yes. Yeah. So qualified medical expenses.
So if you're still working and you go on Medicare, does your insurance that you have with your employer, does that become your secondary insurance? And Medicare becomes your primary, or how does that work?
So this is one of those where it depends, right? So if a company has over 20 employees, most of the time your Medicare becomes your primary and your employer is your secondary.
I'm in a situation where I'm military, retired military.
Yeah.
So I have TRICARE.
Yeah,
Which becomes TRICARE for life once I turn 65.
Yeah.
Which becomes a supplement for Medicare.
Yeah.
So if I'm still working, that's a question I gotta find out how that's
Yeah.
gonna take place.
yeah. So anybody that has served in our military, we do have some additional resources. I think we have contacts in the office, and we would certainly refer you, because once you start getting involved with those benefits and how they all coordinate, it is even more complex. Yeah. So you're welcome to give us a call. We can. Yes.
Going back to the HSA.
Yeah.
I've had an HSA for years.
Yeah.
My husband does not. If he retires before me, then can I go on have him be part of my medical and he has access to all the HSA dollars?
Yeah.
And then I can also contribute the family amount of contributions versus the single?
Correct.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so there is a little trick there. I came across one, I said yes to that question with a client, and they had it through Fidelity, and they didn't allow the spouse that had joined the health plan to put money into the same HSA that was open. They just had to open up a separate HSA. So they still were allowed to put that $1,000 catch-up in, but they required a separate one, so, yeah. There is a lot of change. So these are going to be more popular as health costs go up. The one other thing we're seeing with HSAs is providers are changing very quickly at companies. You know, I've heard some companies switch 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years. So some people want to be in the business, some others don't want to be in the business. So, yeah. Yes.
I'm gonna be retiring very soon.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I feel important now.
Yeah, it's kind of weird talking to the microphone,
It
isn't it?
is. Anyways, I'm going to be retiring very soon. I'm going to be eligible to use company-sponsored health care
Mhm.
until the end of 2019.
Mm.
When that ends, what are my options? Is COBRA the only thing I have to go for, other than Obamacare, or is there other options open for me?
Yeah, I think that's a specific case. So technically, COBRA starts from the date that you're terminated. What we'd want to verify is if that date of the extended coverage would be the termination date, but the fact that you're going to retire, right, and that's just part of your package, my guess is COBRA would only last 18 months from the date you officially stop working there. Yeah. So, you know, one resource I didn't say earlier is there's a website called eHealth Insurance. Okay. If anybody wants just to get a broad idea of what it looks like to get coverage prior to age 65, you can go on there. It's not one of those websites where you put in your information, your email, your phone, or a credit card. Please don't do those ever. And get 1,000 emails after that. It's just a pretty straightforward program, and it'll give you an idea of what's available in the state you reside. Are you work for a private employer, Jason? Okay. So the other thing you could see is, would you be able to continue coverage through the current healthcare provider? You know, just contact them directly, say, my coverage is ending, what would the premiums be? Yeah, that's what we'll do too, so, yeah. Okay. Anything else? Good.
So, we've talked about a lot of stuff. I think a lot of it can be overwhelming because it gets so technical. You start to think, and people put it off, that once you start to move away from the technical to the practical, it starts to become, a little more manageable. But the first thing to really think about is, what do you want? What do you want to do? Don't worry about what you think is possible, practical. Just really sit down and think about what's the vision, and then start taking it from there. It's kind of like if you go to have surgery, you want to have an understanding of the operation and the risks, but you don't really care about the brand of scalpel or the pharmaceutical brand of the anesthesia. You don't need to get into the weeds, and I think that's where people start to do it, and then it becomes so overwhelming that they don't do anything. The second thing is, we want to act kind of as a quarterback. We don't have all the answers, and we're certainly not experts at everything, but we can put you in touch with people that are. We don't sell Medicare supplements, for example. We do have a good resource for that. So as Nick said and as Gail said, there are a lot of special areas, VA benefits, legal questions, tax questions. We can help coordinate that, but just give us a call and we can try to provide some of those resources. The last thing is, I think, again, change is inevitable. So it is a dynamic process, and what's important today may not be that important later. One of the questions that didn't come up, and I'm a little bit surprised, because we do get asked this a lot, is about where to live. There are a number of states that don't have state tax, for example, Florida, Nevada, Texas, etc. New Hampshire, some states do. So people ask, should I move to a state without tax? Should I? And again, that's a more complex question, because for everything that looks like it's a free lunch is usually an issue. And in Florida, for example, your car insurance is probably going to be double or triple what it is here. And there can be other issues. So again, what we'd say is start with a vision, work backwards. If you have questions, you can call us, speak to any of the advisors, and then if you have some of the questions what we covered tonight, it'll be in the books. So we'll be around. Feel free to give us a call, and we appreciate your coming out. Thank you.